All right, good morning, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining part 3 of our deep dive into DriveWorks webinar series. My name is Morgan Hudson. I am an account manager for the manufacturing division at TPM, and I am joined by Joel Hanneman, who is the Director of Technical Solutions, who will be presenting the webinar today.
So it's hard to dive right into integrations with DriveWorks without understanding what DriveWorks is as a whole. In order to communicate that, TPM has what is kind of our descriptor of the 3 pillars of DriveWorks. These are kind of the foundational functional building blocks of the application. Really, it's more of a platform that kind of makes DriveWorks just a very comprehensive and powerful kind of overall solution. And our recent webinar series has kind of correlated with these 3 pillars. So the first pillar and the first video of the series was on all things design automation using SOLIDWORks. Second from there, we moved on to CPQ, that stands for Configure, Price, Quote. And then finally today, we're here to talk about, the industry calls every integrations, but in our minds, that's kind of the everything else quote unquote of using DriveWorks to create like a comprehensive and powerful backend to all things automations. So a quick review of what we went over in those. So design automation, what's it all about? We first introduced the notion of a concept that we call the configurability spectrum. So it's kind of figuring out where your company's product or product lines fit along a spectrum that ranges from basic widgets that you might stock by the millions, all the way off to truly one-off equipment where one day has literally nothing to do with the prior day's worth of work. Anything in between, there is an opportunity for DriveWorks to contribute from an automation standpoint when it comes to design. So we dive pretty deep into what that means, where certain products might stand on this spectrum, and how DriveWorks can address that. Then what's up with automating design? How does it work? How do we capture design intent, and how do we reproduce that on demand? So a lot of principles of design automation we run through that, and we actually went for a little peek under the hood of DriveWorks to see what a day in the life of enabling design automation is all about. So I highly encourage you to take a look at that webinar series if you are interested in CAD automation. Of course, you can also reach out to either one of us for more dialogue on that topic. Then a quick recap of CPQ. What is CPQ? It's a Configure, Price, Quote system. That's an industry term that a lot of configurator companies have adopted. But in principle, it is the ability to select and configure a product, and furthermore, enable a novice or non-expert user to select and configure a product, no matter how complicated it is. At the end of the day, someone should be able to obtain a price in real time, have it be dynamically responsive to the user inputs, and it should just be a smooth, intuitive experience. The back end of CPQ enables the sense of central and shared access to all the materials, collateral, and content associated with the quote and order workflow processes, whether it's actual CAD drawings or PDFs, DXFs, Excel files, Word documents, whatever the collective content is, that needs to be available in a centralized and kind of web-friendly way, right? Again, a whole lot more to know about CPQ and DriveWorks. We have an entire webinar dedicated to that, and check the chat. Morgan will paste the links to those webinars if she hasn't done so already. All right, so moving on. Before we get into integration specifically, let's just kind of look at DriveWorks from a high level. So on the right here, we see what the constituent functional components of DriveWorks are. These are all the areas where we have very powerful and specific expertise to just handle challenges at the highest level. So it's all a matter of writing rules, capturing logic, and making those things actionable. Automating CAD, so producing drawings, part files, assemblies, e-drawing files, whatever it is. Integrations, yep, we'll talk about that more. 3D Preview is the web-friendly 3D graphical rendering technology baked into DriveWorks. UI building, i.e. having a form. Users need somewhere to go to specify your product, to engage with the platform. So we need to be able to build UIs. Workflows, what happens first? What happens second? What happens tomorrow? What happens next year? Capturing all that intelligence and having a programmatic, systematic home for a workflow. Furthermore, reporting. Everyone loves reporting, dashboards, KPIs, and the like. And then, of course, handling any kind of documentation, whether it be a text file, CSV file, JSON, XML, Excel, you name it. If it has an extension, it's something tangible that is useful, we can most likely produce it and do something with it. Okay, so today, when we talk about integrations, we're going to invoke the majority of those functionalities, pretty much everything except for CAD and everything except for the 3D web technology, okay? But when it turns out, when integrating systems isn't just a matter of establishing a connection between one party and another, there's got to be some level of control, some level of a way for the user to actuate the data going back and forth. So that invokes forms, it invokes workflows, and of course rules underpin all that happening smoothly. So if we look at all this in the whole, what are the characteristics of DriveWorks in this sense? Well, we already know it's the ultimate in all things SOLIDWORKS automation. Everything is customizable out of the box, and we'll see some examples of that coming up. All of this is done in a no-code setting, which really allows a much wider group of participation in your company's implementation of DriveWorks. DriveWorks out of the box is web ready. Doesn't have to be installed on a website, but it easily can be. So you look at all that and it really becomes an all-in-one solution that starts to seem more like a platform than just a standalone application. Okay, so we call it everything else. Why is that? And my mind always comes back to this interstitial space analogy. So interstitial space is the space in between a lot of other things. So imagine you have a cup of sand. That cup might be full of sand, but you can still pour water in it, right? So the fact that there's volume available to fit the water means that there's interstitial space. So take that analogy and kind of put some larger rocks in that cup instead of sand, and then it's pretty clear that within the rocks there's plenty of space in between, and frankly this space represents the typical functional problems that most businesses encounter, right? And so the rocks can represent your various business systems, individuals, entire departments, or even different parties within the supply chain. You're the manufacturer, you've got distributors, they have their customers, so on and so forth. And so it's at the connection point between any given one of these rocks where the problems can occur. And so the connections between rocks, you could equate to what integrations could or should be, right? And so how strong are those connections? Are they fragile? Do they exist at all? Are they just teetering and barely hanging in there? And so we like to think that DriveWorks is like adding the water, where we now can connect everything to anything in a fashion that is robust and would solve your individual business challenges. So we're filling in the gaps, and in doing so, we're really starting to talk about controlling who, what, when, and how any given piece of activity happens within the business. Again, starting to feel more like a platform than an application. And if digital transformation is a thing in your business, this certainly lays the groundwork for that kind of a journey. Okay, so let's dig deeper into the everything else concept. What does that really mean? It's all fine and good to talk about pouring water into a cup, but at the end of the day, what are we actually doing in a physical sense within the business? Well, integrations is all about data. At the end of the day, any business relies on data to operate. Doesn't matter if you're a multinational 15 facility manufacturing company or a fruit distributor in Florida. I mean, everyone relies on data somehow. It's just a matter of what the attitude towards data is, what solutions are in place to handle it well, and ultimately, you have to ask yourself, does everyone have the right data in their hands at the right time? If not, then there's plenty of improvements to be had when it comes to managing data. And this is what DriveWorks right out of the box is quite adept at doing. We can interface with just about any database type. We can interface with just about any flat file or text file type. We have a growing list of out-of-the-box plugins for ready-made integrations. So whether it's a PDM system, ERP, CRM, a bespoke application you've had for years, a variety of databases scattered around the enterprise, whatever it is, DriveWorks can position itself in the middle and be the traffic cop and kind of manager of it all, if you so chose. So we can start to think about truly connecting all your systems, putting all that rich data to work, and is always the case when a new customer takes on DriveWorks and gets familiar with it, and they get the power of automation and integrations in their hands, inevitably they start to rethink what they consider work, right? Is work but a bunch of busyness? That is copying data from one spreadsheet to another, and then replicating that into ERP, and then emailing something to a colleague who enters the data somewhere else. Is that work, or is work actually something more valuable that a human can do to contribute to further the business agenda? Okay. So all things data are right at your fingertips out of the box in DriveWorks. So that's one dimension of everything else. The other is the depth and breadth of what is customizable in the application. Okay, and as I mentioned before, UI is a thing. Users need a place to go, to press the buttons, to make the selections, to propagate a workflow, so on and so forth. So we have two images here. On the bottom is a DriveWorks form. That form was built in DriveWorks. We'll actually see that live in a few minutes. That form started off as a blank page, as you see on the top. So much like creating a PowerPoint slide from scratch, you know, that PowerPoint could be as beautiful as you choose to make it, right? And it's just a matter of dragging your mouse, selecting settings, and is really all it takes to create an attractive, functional, and intuitive form for your user base to use. Okay, so much of DriveWorks is rooted in that form technology. Furthermore, workflows is quite important. What happens when, how, and why. So this is a rudimentary example of a workflow. Most companies' workflows are quite extensive, have multiple loops, and a given business process can go in any number of directions at any time for any reason. This is the place where that kind of decision making can have a home. So not only can we control what happens within any given step, like if we're in data entry, what's happening while you're in the process of entering data, but furthermore, when we go from data entry to processing, and there's what we would call a transition, what exactly happens then? So if I hit a button when I'm done with data entry, does an email get sent out? Do we update the database? Do we send the user to another web page? Who knows what? You tell us what you need to happen at any given point, and we can build that directly into the workflow. At a more granular level, we have what are called macros. This is a much more specific sequencing of activity. Okay, so when I finished entering the data, I hit a button and an email went out. Well, to whom? And then what happened after the email went out? Do we send another email? Do we then send a very specific portion of data to one database and then move other data around, and then we release some SOLIDWORKS files, email the DXF file, who knows what, but it's the sequencing and the order of operations that we can set at a very bespoke and particular level. And again, you are looking at the interface for doing so. You don't see a whole lot of code here, right? It's a lot of drag and drop, WYSIWYG work that is mostly done with a mouse, a little bit of typing here and there. Okay. So how are the rules created? This is the rule builder that exists throughout all of DriveWorks, whether you're writing a rule to control anything to do with SOLIDWORKS, or you're writing a rule for the form builder, or you're writing a rule to create an integration, this is the place where that syntax comes to life. And many years ago, DriveWorks was used Excel as its underlying engine. DriveWorks has moved on from that fact 15 plus years ago, but the underlying syntax is still very Excel-like. So what we say is if you are capable of writing a moderately sophisticated Excel formula, then you are hereby qualified to write rules in DriveWorks. Case being the point here, a simple if statement. I think anyone could read this and basically understand what logic is being put into action. Okay, so at the end of the day, DriveWorks is a blank canvas. Unlike a lot of other configurator type products that are end up just being like fancy list managers, DriveWorks is a clean slate that you can build up your automation and integration needs from the ground up just how you see fit. Along the way, everything is dynamic, everything is responsive, can be controllable at every point, all the while not requiring a single bit of programming. Okay, let's see this in action. So I'm going to take us to our demo site for DriveWorks, and I think we'll include a link to this if you want to play around on your own. You're more than welcome to do so. The website is called driveworkslive.com, and there's a lot of good stuff on here that I'm going to review with you before we get into the integration matters. So just first thing to know is that everything on this site was built using DriveWorks. Okay, so inside of here we have what we would call an embedded configurator, right? It's simplistic. It's just this, basic pump apparatus, and you can make some basic choices. But the point is that it's 3D, it's live, real-time pricing, fully integrated seamlessly into a website. So give that a whirl. There's a couple other example products here. Beyond that, we have what we would consider a more traditional standalone product configurator, and a lot of them. We have 20 plus separate configurators for a variety of industries, variety of products, and all of these configurators are structured slightly differently. They're not all created the same. So if you go through a few of these, you'll start to see pretty quickly that there's a lot of ways that a configurator could go. Okay, scrolling down some more. Nice, very informative video about CPQ, configure price quote. In about 2 minutes, you can get a very nice rundown of what that means, what it implies, and a good sense of how that could help your business. And we do also have some live CPQ demos. Getting to the very bottom here, down to the good stuff for today, we have a total review of all the underlying DriveWorks technology. So they will take you through a tour of what it's like to use and operate DriveWorks. It's kind of like a day in the life of, right? And each one of these it's a tour, it's a demo, but it's actually they're using DriveWorks to demo DriveWorks. Pretty neat. So we're going to check out the integration one of these. Okay, so before we dive in, okay, so you can see that this little screen popped up and then another screen on top of it. We're still on that underlying website, but we are operating what I would consider like a standalone, well, what would usually be a configurator, product configurator. Now it's just a part of a web page, and all this web page is doing is showing us what integrating with DriveWorks is all about. So getting back to forms and UI, right? This form here with the gray background and the white areas, and we have buttons and images and cool stuff to read and interface with. All of this was built using DriveWorks. Okay, again, no code, WYSIWYG stuff. So what we're going to do is start off by understanding that there's only so many ways that one can integrate. So fundamentally, you have files like a text file, CSV, XML, JSON, and the like. Maybe tab delimited, who knows what, but the point is that it is a standalone file with a certain extension, and whatever data is required is within the file. We can read in such files, we can write to such files. That's a very common way for one system to integrate with another, is that system A produces an XML file or similar, puts it somewhere on the network. System B keeps an eye on that network location. If it sees a new file, it takes action and knows what to do with it. So that's where a lot of companies start, because it's a physical thing. It's easy to generate the files. So long as both parties know what to do with the file, you're off and running in no time. Kind of next level up in robustness and maybe use of technology and sophistication is, of course, use of databases. So we can, DriveWorks works on its own database in SQL. Other business systems often use SQL. Not that you necessarily want DriveWorks to touch your ERP's SQL database, but often there's a solution to have an intermediate database, a neutral database in between, that much like having a file in between, both systems know how to read and write from that data and keep an eye on the database and have some kind of trigger to know when to take action. Okay, so that's fundamental stuff right out of the box, really easy to implement, set up, running. Kind of what's becoming the more standard way of communicating between systems is all things web services, taking advantage of HTTP requests. Okay, this is gaining popularity because there's just so much standardization in web services as just a fundamental technology. Various software companies, in particular DriveWorks, have a lot of documentation on how their web service endpoints work, what kind of data it needs, how is it structured, on what grounds can one system access another through the internet. All that is just becoming very mature, very increasingly easy to interface with and get up and running. So that's a very popular one these days. If none of those three kind of foundational levels of integration do the trick, there's always using one system's API or the other, including DriveWorks has a fully documented API if it needs to be put to work, and most other business systems do as well. Then finally, if you are using a business system that DriveWorks has already created what we call a Power Pack for, it's like a plugin, then that integration is ready to go out of the box, no development required. We'll see some examples of what systems we have that for, and there's a growing roadmap of additional systems that will be coming online over time. That's the overview. Let's move on. So here's an example of, clear my screen here, a simplistic real life example of how DriveWorks can work comprehensively. So in the top half of the screen, we have what I would call just a run-of-the-mill product configurator. We're using that nice 3D technology to visualize the product, and the user who doesn't need to know much about a cabinet can come in and design the cabinet that they need, picking dimensions, materials, features, you name it. You know, a proper configurator would have much more to play with. In this case, they're just limiting it to a few basic things. So that's what's going on the top, and what you might notice in the bottom is that what you might envision as a bill of materials is reacting dynamically, real time, to the choices made in the form, i.e. it's an integration of sorts, right? So if I change that height, make it a squat cabinet, part numbers are changing, descriptions are changing, quantities are changing. It's kind of hard to see, but if we just pick something here, we can see this. So here's 1080 high, make it lower. Oh, now it's 880 high, right? So point being is that we can have real-time connectivity between a configuration workflow and the underlying data that will need to be used downstream. So what is downstream? How do we get downstream? In this example, we're just using that file export version. So what does the downstream business system require? Text file. Come on, we got that ready to go instantly. Where does it need to go? Just put it there, we're good. Similarly, XML, JSON, all the same. All that data, if it's programmatically known, you can put it to work as soon and upstream as you need it. By the way, this demo is being run live from the DriveWorks servers in the UK. So all the while, this is quite performant, right? I am communicating with their server real time across the ocean. All right, so that's exporting data. Of course, sometimes you need to import data. Why not do that? So here we go. I'll just pick an example data set. Okay, here it is in its raw form. And in traditional DriveWorks fashion, we can do a whole lot with it once it's inside of DriveWorks. There's hundreds of functions that can slice and dice data, whether it's in a list format, a tabular format, you name it. We can parse JSON data in XML. I mean, we can do anything we need with data once we have our hands on it. So here we're just going to recognize that this is comma delimited. And now all of a sudden we can make sense of what we just pulled in. Right? Maybe this is helpful as part of your workflow. Just any given ability to bring in data, visualize it, do something with it, whatever that might be. All right, so that's a quick review of files. Now let's move on to databases. So if you've been around, you've interfaced with databases before, you're familiar with some kind of database interface syntax. We do a lot with SQL, so that's what most of these demos are based on. Anything that you could, any query you could imagine running through Management Studio or SQL Server, we could run through DriveWorks or via DriveWorks. And furthermore, we can synthesize those queries with information that is gathered via DriveWorks real time. So we can see here a basic query setup, and then this will be the modified query string as per the user's input. So this is going to be dynamically responsive between that kind of third-party database and the DriveWorks form as delivered through the website and ocean away. So we'll just do a rudimentary example of that. We just hereby modified that query, thus modifying the results. And of course, we're seeing that change real time on my screen here. Okay, this is but a simple example. We often get involved with pretty sophisticated stored procedures, views, whatever you might be used to taking advantage of in your database system. We can either replicate that or interface with it or augment it from within DriveWorks. So that's reading data. What about writing to it? Again, another rudimentary example using SQL querying. So here is a basic insert statement. Okay, that's going to dynamically pull from a DriveWorks form. Okay, we can see we've kind of inserted that into the query. Click a button, boom, there's our data now residing on that database thousands of miles away. Need to do that again. So all day long, we can write data to a database just like we can read from it. Simple example, but in reality, this gets much more complicated and comprehensive as you could probably imagine. All right, back to kind of the not emerging, but maturing and popularized way of communicating via web services. A great method for communicating across the internet or even just across your local network. Web services are a nicely standardized communication format. So this is a basic example of interfacing with the Google Maps API right here live within DriveWorks. We could even use Google has hundreds of APIs. Right, this is just using the distance matrix version. We could have used the actual map rendering version and supplied the map real time here in our form. But as you can see, we can put into locations real time. Click a button, instantly get results. So we sent data to Google, we got data back in an instant. So DriveWorks UK, well, my mouse to DriveWorks UK to Google and back. That's nice, but it could be DriveWorks grabbing SOLIDWORKS data, sending it to ERP. It could be going off your CRM data to get some contact info and an email address and putting that in a form so that we can get a CAD drawing off to the customer. You name it. If you need to get data to and from other systems via the internet, web services is a great way to go. Another example here, Parcel Monkey, put in your address. A couple seconds later, we'll get all of our options for freight costs. Okay, that's sending data. If we need to receive data, we can set up DriveWorks as a web service in of itself to just be on the receiving end of communication. So let's say, for example, you do all of your order entry in an ERP system, and your part numbering routine fully defines the product, and all you need to do is specify the customer, enter the line items on the order, pick your part numbers, pick the quantities, so on and so forth, and you click a button and you're done with the order, you're ready to go. Why not just have DriveWorks pick that up right away and make all the quoting documentation, all the pre-production documentation, update databases, notify employees of the order status, let your customer know that the order's been entered, whatever you got to do. We can let DriveWorks handle all that because we can just take in any bit of data from any system and tell DriveWorks what to do with it. Okay, going this route could require some amount of coding in your third-party system. That's not necessarily required on the DriveWorks side, but it would kind of be up to your third-party system how that underlying data is created and sent out. All right. Like I said, if those three traditional communication methods don't do the trick, whether it be files, databases, or web services, we can always get involved with the API. In this case, we do start to divert from our low-code claims of how DriveWorks works. And frankly, when we're starting to use the API, we are going down the path of building out functionality that's outside the application or in addition to the shipped application. So it does require some knowledge of programming, either in .NET or C#. Use the language of choice. It's all built on the .NET platform. So if you need some functionality, very bespoke to your needs, then DriveWorks can accommodate that approach as well. Okay, I mentioned Power Packs before. There's a growing list of popular and established third-party applications like ERP and CRM and CAM applications that DriveWorks has plugins ready to download, install to your implementation, and put to use right away. All the Power Packs are free. They come with the purchase of DriveWorks. There's no extra cost kind of hidden behind the scenes to make that happen. Okay. Again, if there is a need for deeper programmatic approach to interfacing with DriveWorks, we can do that through what we call the integration theme, which is the website that DriveWorks sets up to make the entire implementation web ready. Through the integration theme, we can, using the DriveWorks web API, we can pretty much control anything about what DriveWorks does kind of as an installed implementation. So basically you can have a website that talks to the implementation and has it just automate whatever it is. And so the integration theme incorporates all kind of the modern web tech, mostly from a security standpoint, but also it's built on the latest HTML and CSS standards. DriveWorks has done a great job of staying on the cutting edge of where web tech is going and continues to take advantage of that technology. So, okay, well, that's about it from a demo standpoint. I encourage you to come check this out yourself, play around with the tools, check out some of these other demos as well. If you want to see what automating CAD's all about, that's a great little demo here. What's up with writing rules? How do we create forms? What does a workflow look like in DriveWorks? The company does a great job of taking someone through that and explaining the fundamentals of that. So, that's it. That concludes our three-part series on all things DriveWorks.